Hey guys, this is Matt at ForHydroponics.com, and today we're going to be talking about what the impact of your garden's environment has on your overall plant health. So I'd say we'll start with lighting, but first keep in mind that everything in your garden is interconnected. There is not one thing you can lift up or move up or raise up the amounts of and not have to have everything else come up or go down with it for it to really work optimally. There is a little bit of wiggle room in there, but in all honesty they really are just pretty much all connected. So lighting, for instance, is going to be the first thing people think of with the garden. With HID lights, they're going to obviously create more heat, so we're going to really need to think about how we're going to keep this space in the right temperature range, is what we'll talk about here in a minute. And then they are going to be more intense than a compact fluorescent, so keep that in mind, that for the heat that you have to deal with, you're getting more intensity for less wattage. The amount of light we're looking for in a garden, and I'll just talk about HID versus fluorescent lighting because those are the two main sources that we do. LEDs in there too, but mostly we deal with fluorescent and HID. So in HID lighting, they're going to say about 30 watts per square foot is about your minimum, and 50 watts per square foot, and you should be having a really effective garden. Cfls or compact fluorescents, T5s, are about 5 times less strong or intense as HID lights, which means a 30 watt HID is really the equivalent of a 150 watt CFL or T5. So if you got fluorescent bulbs in your room, you're going to really have to step up the amount of wattage to keep the intensity up, which is why in some regards it's not always worth it. Even though you lose a little bit of need to cool the space, maybe you are going to have a lot more electricity in there to keep your intensity up. Other than that, we want to make sure that the light is always the proper distance from the plant. In fact, you can go as far as getting a par meter or a lumens meter, just to make sure that you're always keeping your light exactly as far away from the plant as possible. A lot of people don't really think that you need to move it around that much, and you may not have to, but if you kept that light at the exact distance from the top of the plant it should be at all times, you would have a better run than you did if you didn't. A lot of that has to do with light penetration, getting deeper into the plant and creating better overall harvests, because more maturation, more density, better yields through light flower sets that are lower on the plant, actually getting enough light to finish and to be worth something versus something that doesn't really make the cut. So distance from the top of the plant, intensity, and then color of lighting. A lot of people like to use metal halides in veg. That's going to give you a little shorter, stockier growth, and then flip over to HPS and flower. That also helps trigger the flowering of a plant. The reason that is because metal halides replicate more of the spring and summer spectrum of the sun. When the sun's going very high in the sky, we're getting more blue and white light, and then in the fall and winter, or towards the end of summer and then into fall, the sun's not going as high in the sky. We're getting it through a lot more atmosphere. It's coming off much more orange and yellow, and that's going to naturally trigger the plants from a vegetative state into a flowering state. You can veg under metal halide and flower under metal halide, and you also can veg under HPS and flower under HPS. The combination of the two seems to work really well. I think if you had to choose one single bulb that just universal, HPS would probably be the one that to do veg and flower under. Metal halide is probably not as ideal for a bulb to go all the way from start to finish under, but the quality of that bulb is really talking about the quality of the light coming off of it, which has a lot to do with overall maturation, oil production, aroma, flavor. It's going to have a lot to do with the quality of your light. Quality of light is what drives the quality of your product, not intensity. Intensity of light is what drives the yield of your product. So you really want a mixture of intensity and quality, which is usually only found in some of the higher end bulbs. The cheaper bulbs will have a lot of intensity, but you really just don't get that quality that you might be looking for. So next up we'll talk about CO2 in the garden. It goes right hand in hand with light. CO2 is going to help basically the plant's overall growth cycle. Ambient levels of CO2 are usually between 350 and up to 400, 450 in really heavily polluted areas, lots of cars driving around, things like that. And maybe in a swamp or a bog somewhere, if you live in that area, it might be a little more higher than normal, but traditionally right around 350, 400. If you do not exchange the air in your room at least, I'd say 2 to 3 times, anywhere from 1 to 3 times a minute, if you do not exchange the air in your room, it'll be hard to keep those optimal ambient levels. You'll start dipping down below 350 here and there, and on an overall course of a run, it can cause you some yield there. So if you're not going to be running extra CO2, make sure you're doing a really thorough job of exchanging the complete cubic foot space of your room. They say 1 to 3, even up to 5 times per minute. So take the cubic feet of your space and multiply it by 3 to 5, and that's how much you're looking to move, and that's how much air you're looking to move in that space. If you have a small little closet or a little tent, and it's not really, the temperature's not getting to you, but you want to make sure your CO2 levels are staying ambient, something like this little CO2 bag. This is made by a local company. There are some more larger national companies out there that you'll find all over the place. These are just mushroom cultures that basically produce CO2. You can throw those into a garden space. They're about used for 4x4 area, so if you get a little bit bigger, maybe get a couple of them. And if you're not exhausting out of that room constantly, that'll keep your ambient or your CO2 levels at least at ambient levels like outside or higher. So this is a great way to get some extra CO2 in your room that you don't have a lot of air exchange in. Other than that, if you use CO2 wrong, you have way too much CO2 and you have low light, or even you have a lot of light, it can cause stretchiness, it can cause problems in late flowering. We don't really want it around during the harvest. We really want to cut it out the last couple weeks because it inhibits ethylene gas production, which is what we need for ripening. So CO2 is great for, veg, it's okay. It doesn't seem to make a huge difference unless you are really committed to it. I would say most people really just want to spend the money on it in mid to early flower and then drop it out at the end of flower. So this is a great way to get it in there, and then you go all the way up to a tank and regulator and all the way to generator if you have a bigger space to keep your CO2 levels right where you want them and really dial that in. The higher the CO2 levels and the more light you get, we need to raise the temperature. Most people are worried about having higher temperatures, but like we said, they're all connected. If we have a ton of light and we have a lot of CO2, we're going to need a little bit warmer temperature to make sure that those plants can use all that extra light and use all that CO2. A lot of people don't believe that even though I have my temperature 75, if my CO2 is at 1500 parts per million and my lights are as close as they can get, everything's optimal, but not really. They work, everything's connected, so we need to raise that temperature up a little bit, and honestly probably that humidity a little bit. But temperature ranges should really never get into the 90s, never above, in my opinion, 85. I would say that's the max really. If you're running 1500 parts per million and you're running a lot of light and you're running around 85 degrees, that's about a red line for a plant. I mean, if it was a car, tachometer, it would be in the red. So keep that in mind. You also want to always consider when you're dealing with any of the lighting issues connected to CO2 and temperature, you don't want to overcool your lights. That can be an issue. So your lights have an optimal operating temperature, but we want to run independently of that in the garden, anywhere between 75 down to 72 up to about 85. And that's where it gets into the larger lights you run. The more lights you run, the more you have to combat the heat they're creating. We don't want to bring super cold air through our light bulbs and say, okay, now I don't have the heat issue anymore, because those light bulbs have an optimal operating temperature, and if you get them too cold, the quality of light coming off them, the color we were talking about, will start to degrade. So let them do their thing, cool them, but not too cool, and then we have to combat the temperatures in the room. If we get up into the 90s, most plants, now obviously there's always the exception, the desert plants and all this other stuff, those plants have waxier, thicker leaves specifically to deal with higher temperatures. The majority of plants that we're talking about here, their limits are in the 90s, right around 90. At around 90, most plants will start to close their stomatas, which are the little openings they have on the bottom of their leaves that they use for transpiration, which is their cooling purpose or cooling cycle. They will start to close those because they cannot keep up with the temperature and they can't keep up with the transpiration rates, but by closing those and slowing down transpiration, they will actually raise the internal temperature of the leaf, and they can actually start to have damage from internal temperature being too high. So it can really start to slow down the plant's progress. It'll also create a thing called stress proteins. The plant will go through a process of creating what they call stress heat proteins. There's a better name for that, but that's just basically layman's terms. That takes energy away from the plant's ability to make flowers and make yield and to make aroma and flavor and all these other things that we want. Anytime that plant's using energy for something else, it's taking it away from what we need it for. So not only does heat cause the plant to have issues transpiring, which is really one of its main functions, but it also will cause that plant to try to fight for itself, making proteins that will take away from your overall quality and yield. So heat is extremely important. At all costs, get it down. And then last but not least, I'd say humidity is really high on the list. A lot of people don't put too much into humidity, but you would really see a big difference if you kept your humidity between, I'd say 55 is the optimal range, give or take 10%, so down to 45 and up to 65. Not much higher than that, and you can have mold issues, pest issues, and the transpiration rates can slow down if you get too humid. Too much lower than that in the humid range will start transpiring too much, and that can actually bring liquid at a faster rate through the plant to help it cool, to help it equalize the humidity in the room, which can lead it to bring up nutrients and kind of over fertilize itself. So too dry of a room can actually have an impact on your plants, maybe over fertilizing themselves. Too humid of a room and the plants will slow down their rate of transpiration and thus not use as much nutrients, and you'll see your growth rates slow down. So we really want to keep that humidity right around 55 in the middle. I was going to go a little higher, it'd be in veg, and I would drop it out lower into flower. We have a lot of stuff here that, a day-night temperature thermostat that you can hook up to a lot of different devices to blow cold air in, suck hot air out. This is what, a really simple way to start moving air from one space to another, to start controlling your temperature on an independent thermostat for that space. Not super expensive, not hard to find. A lot of people think they have to go get some special thermostat from the hardware store. These are 50, 60 bucks, 70 bucks, depending on which one you get. And you can plug a fan into it, hook it up to a window, blow cold air in, it'll turn on and off for you, or you could suck hot air and blow it out, it'll turn on and off for you. So that's a great way to control temperatures. Obviously, air conditioners have their own mechanisms of turning on and off for you, so that's also a really easy set and forget ways to have a nice air conditioner. They make portables, they make split ACs, which we sell on our website. And then next we have some devices to measure your temperature, humidity, some analog one that's super cheap and effective, a couple different digital ones. This one actually has wireless sensors, can do up to 4 different spaces for you, so you can measure different rooms. And then last but not least, we have a little clip fan over here just to represent one of the last things we didn't really talk about was going to be just air movement in the space is just as important as anything else. The way plants actually transpire, as they release that water vapor and those gases out of their stomata, they need the wind to come by and blow it off of them to help pull the next molecule out. It's a siphon effect, and without that air blowing underneath their leaves on a regular basis, the gases and vapors will build up underneath their leaf tissue, which can cause just lower rates of transpiration in unhealthy plants. So keep a lot of air moving in there. A lot of people will say, I only got 1 fan or 2 fans. It's actually a really important part of the way the plants cool themselves, is being 100% dependent on, in nature, there is going to be some kind of breeze almost at any moment of the day, and that will help me get rid of those gases and vapors and water molecules that I'm spitting out while I'm trying to cool myself. So all this stuff's available on our website. And a lot more. There's also a bunch more information. There's so many variations on controllers, monitors, timers, things that you can use to help control your humidity, help control your temperature, make sure you got a lot of air moving in your space, control your CO2. We have a lot of that stuff on our website, so don't be afraid, come check it out. I hope this video helped you guys out, and we'll check you next time.